In 1960s San Francisco, at the corner of Kearny and Jackson Street, stood the International Hotel, a low-income, single-room occupancy residential building. The I-Hotel was located in what was known as Manilatown, which stretched along Kearny Street for up to 10 blocks. Manilatown housed an estimated 10,000 Filipino workers, many of whom were transient residents who worked on farms along the West Coast and worked in San Francisco on the off-harvest seasons. I interviewed Manang Jeanette Lazam and Manang Estella Habal, who remembered what it was like living in the I-Hotel at the time.
I would say 95% of the tenancy of the International Hotel was Filipino. There were a few young people there, like myself, but the vast majority were elderly Filipino who were retired. So their social security checks weren't that much.
That's kind of a fixed income. So you can't live beyond your means, especially in rent.
But you could live at the International Hotel and pay $50 a month rent. You know, you couldn't beat that. And then you're right across the street from Chinatown, and at that time, there were at least 3 Filipino restaurants on Kearny Street or across the street. When I finally moved in there, it was like I had 50 fathers and 7 mothers. It really was a community.
It was kind of like they were my family, and I was their family. There were all these laws that people couldn't get together. I didn't have a large Filipino community, didn't even have aunts and uncles. My grandparents were in the Philippines. I felt like they were family. And I think for them, they thought I was the daughter that they never had.
You walk into those doors after working all day and you come into the lobby and people are hanging. They'd say, "Have you eaten yet? How was your day? Have you eaten yet? Have you eaten?" You know, it's like 50 times. And they're ready to give whatever they cooked. You know, it was a genuine feeling of community. I knew I was moving into a community that began to trust me as a young person.
But in 1968, eviction notices were delivered to the tenants of the I-Hotel. With the city prioritizing development of the financial district and pushing out working-class communities, the I-Hotel was one of the last remaining buildings of Manilatown left. The owner, Walter Shorenstein, planned to demolish the I-Hotel and turn it into a parking lot.
At that point, the tenants start to organize. We'd go on television, we'd go on radio, we'd get interviewed.
They also had organizing experience. They also had fought against fascist farm rule. It was those kinds of people who we met in the farm workers movement and in an international hotel.
So by the time the I-Hotel gets sold, Walter Shorenstein sells it, unbeknownst to us. He sells it to the Four Seas Investment Corporation, which is a Thai-based organization. The outpouring of people in San Francisco and beyond to support was absolutely incredible. In your wildest dreams, you could have never thought that the defense of the International Hotel could have ever reached that height.
So what's specific about that time period? There was the Third World Strikes. There was the anti-Vietnam War movement. There was the gay liberation. There was the women's movement. In other words, all of this was going on at the same time while the I-Hotel struggle was going on. We were riding a wave.
We intend to peacefully resist this eviction. We intend to have many of our supporters as well as our tenants in the hotel ready on that day. The sheriffs are just simply going to have to drag us out of this building.
Fight hard with us so that we can maintain the hotel from being demolished. Our unity is our strength, our hope.
Now they come here and make a lot of damages to human body, to human right. We're a peaceful people who lived in that building. And why do you have to do this to us?
You know, you move 55 people out. All the storefront tenants are also evicted. They bludgeoned every single door. When they came to our door, I said, please don't. We're coming out. It didn't matter. Bam! They sledgehammered the bathrooms so people could not come back and use them. It was a traumatizing event that I will never, ever, ever forget.
It's all the same part of the plan of the financial sector having dominance over the people, over, people's lives, basically. And if you can't cut it, according to them, move out or be homeless. That's what the story was at the I-Hotel.
When I moved back to the hotel in 2019, I don't know, for some reason I thought that I was going to see my old friends. I was one of the very few, if any, last living tenant to move back into the International Hotel. It's very different now. You don't have that same spirit. They were in the etchings in the windows. They were in the shadings of the downstairs in the Manilatown Center, but none of them were alive. When you lose something that is so foundational in your life, like an incredible expanded family, it's hard to deal with that.
Housing is a right, and I would hope the young people know that, and they should struggle for it. Here in the South of Market, they have a piece of it because they struggled for it and they fought for it. And it's not only to build up the Filipino community, but it's to make sure that housing is affordable for the people. What are you preserving? If you're trying to preserve the culture and there's no people, what is that?
We have a very rich history of struggle in this country. Appropriate the history any which way you can, so you get to create yours and give it to the generation after you.
Today, I decided to make a pancit bihon because Manang Jeanette said it's one of her favorites. And as I cook this pancit, I think about how after that first eviction notice in 1968 to the I-Hotel tenants, those following 9 years would not have been possible without the continuous organizing done by the tenants. The tenants, many of whom had been in the farm labor movements, knew that your rights had to be fought for, and they knew what organizing together could achieve. Even until the very end, they never backed down. Today you can visit and see the International Hotel Manilatown Center that's dedicated to preserving the memories of the I-Hotel and Manilatown. Down the street, I see the work being done by my community here in SOMA Pilipinas to preserve our neighborhood. And so the struggle for the I-Hotel shows that in every situation, here in San Francisco and around the world, where profits are put above people's basic needs for fair wages, for better working conditions, for affordable housing and a place to call home, it's we, who have to fight for our rights and never back down.